My upgrades are Invincible, Chapter 58, Fan Fiction, by Azazyel. I slammed down into the ground with a mental curse, as just because I slammed a whole fucking axe's head into Guts' side, that didn't mean he was out of the fight. No, that just meant that he was angry and thus was even stronger, as he only growled instinctively at my axe blow and he just backstopped to get the space to try to chop me in half with his oversized fucking sword. Fucking monster. I thought wryly as I wondered just how fast he could level up if he had a fauna boosting his unnatural strength and resilience. But any what-ifs were forgotten as I rolled out of the way of his sideways swing that had attempted to cut me in half previously was transitioned into an overhead chop that tried to carve me open with a powerful downward swing. And as I rolled to my feet, I held my axe with both hands over my head, and with a grunt of effort, I threw the Leviathan axe like a much smaller throwing axe at high speed. Its harsh, whooshing noise as it traveled through the air was broken as, with a loud clanging noise, the blade of my axe met his braced dragon slayer that he held up as a shield to cover his body. As he held up his sword like a shield, I made him pay for that as I dashed forward and drop-kicked the flat side of the flat so it smashed into his face while I backflipped off the kick with my two spears forming in my hands that I threw at Guts, with him dodging one of them but the other one slammed home into his upper stomach just below his chest. Did I get his liver? I thought as I took out my rivers of blood to try to fight Guts at more of a distance. But Guts staggered slightly as the spear that was in his chest was naturally in the way of his massive sword, so he had to remove the spear, and my thoughts were right as blood gushed out from the spear wound. So seeing him leaking so much blood, I slashed at him with my rivers of blood katana, draining my own blood and mana to send boiling blood constructs that slashed into Guts' form, and then as the blood conjurations hit his own blood. His own blood exploded weakly from the inside as the bleed magic worked its way into his upper stomach chest area via the spear wound I left behind. But even with a fist-sized fucking hole in him that was pissing out blood, Guts didn't stop. No, I saw his eyes glowing with determination as he strode towards me with only the intent of cutting me down. So I met his determination with my own as I kicked my Leviathan axe back into my hand. With his blood draining out of him, I took a breath as I dove towards him with my Leviathan axe, and as he swung his sword at me I met the sword swing with a jumping kick with my adamantine-heeled boot, stopping his blade short, and then I kicked his sword into his chest again as I brought my axe down and it slammed home into his neck with a harsh cracking noise as the axe broke his neck. I met Guts' eyes as I landed on my feet, and there was a moment of clarity in his eyes as he fucking smirked of all things before his sword slipped out of his hands, and then he fell face first into the ground with blood quickly pooling around his corpse. A spinning vertigo feeling hit my mind, and I closed my eyes as my soul was brought back into my body, with myself blinking hurriedly as I felt my own Dragon Slayer's sword heat up upon my palm, lying on it. I opened my eyes and looking upon the wide open blade, I saw an image of Guts in his berserk armor crouching with his sword resting on and over his shoulder, with Guts' glowing red eyes looking at me from within the sword before he nodded at me, and then the illusion disappeared. Well, that was something, I muttered as I pulled my hand back, and then I shrugged my shoulders as I didn't really feel any different, and it hit me that I probably needed to get my fauna updated to get the Invictus skill added. Looking over to Tina, I asked, "Anything change about me?" Tina gave me a long look and then shook her head as she said bluntly, "Nope, nothing has changed about you." I couldn't help but twitch to my lips at her cutting remark as I thought, wow. I just dueled and killed a badass warrior, but nothing has changed. That feels kinda defeating, honestly. But then again, Guts, for all his supernatural strength, was still human and was thus susceptible to having his body fatally wounded. Either way, I sighed and then threw the sword on my bed into my spatial storage as I brought a hand up to my face, as I had the next thought on my mind. Well, I guess I should fuse those mermaids together along with fusing my infant dragon into my kelpie to make a dragon-blooded horse that I can ride. The kelpie was perfect as a horse, as it could run through water like it wasn't there while also being able to run atop water without any issue. And having a good mount would make going into Lake Melon a lot safer as I could fight atop the kelpie's back while wearing undine fabric, so I also wasn't slowed down by the water. Lake Melon would be my next dungeon basically, for a while, for me to pad out my stats as I go about doing my weapon and enchanted item missions to stockpile skills and powerful enchanted weapons I could use later on. Well, let's go make some breakfast, Tina, I said after clearing my mind. As we did get woken up super early by the monsters breaking into our zone of ownership of the beach of Melon, and thus hadn't properly eaten. As we came out of my bedroom, I smiled seeing Tamamo herself was already at work making a hearty breakfast, so picking up my lovely short stack, Tina, I plopped her into my lap as I sat down at the dining room table and just enjoyed holding her. And if my hands drifted around to her very nice, palm-sized breasts and gave them a good honk, then that was my right as a man who was bored and had boobies in his hands range. Once the food was plated up and brought out, I began thinking about what I should do for my future growth, and then it hit me that I also needed to make sure Tamamo and Tina could still grow at a decent speed. So after a mental grunt of despair, I also decided to go check in on Rukadavada Familia next door to ask how adventures in Melon grow.